Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Mango Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. Jake walked into his quiet suburban home after a long day at work. The scent of Samantha's signature lasagna filled the air, wafting in from the kitchen, where soft music played. This was their usual routine: dinner, laughter, and mundane conversations about their days. He had no reason to suspect that tonight would be any different. As he stepped into the living room, he noticed her phone glowing on the coffee table. Normally, Samantha guarded it like a hawk, but tonight it was left unlocked and unattended. He hesitated. Jake wasn't the type to pry, but an unfamiliar name on the screen caught his eye. Eric. His heart sank as he read the preview of a message that made his stomach churn. "I can't wait to see you tonight. It's been torture keeping this from him." Time seemed to freeze. Jake sank into the couch, the weight of the words pressing down on him. Could it really be what it seemed? For years, he'd built a life with Samantha, a life he thought was built on trust and love. Yet here it was, staring him in the face. With trembling hands, he scrolled through her recent messages. What he found confirmed his worst fears. The exchanges with Eric, filled with intimate plans and whispered secrets, painted a picture of betrayal. Samantha's affair wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It was an ongoing relationship, orchestrated with the precision of a well-rehearsed play. Every text, every declaration of love for Eric was a knife to his heart. What hurt more than the infidelity was the casual disdain Samantha showed for Jake in their exchanges. She mocked his routines, his predictability, and even his trust in her. Jake's mind raced. He wanted to confront her, to demand answers, to shout and rage at the injustice. But a voice in the back of his head stopped him. What would that accomplish? Instead, he made a decision that would change everything. He would wait, stay calm, and plan his next move carefully. If Samantha thought she could humiliate him and walk away unscathed, she had underestimated him. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. The image of Samantha texting Eric burned into his mind. While she lay peacefully beside him, he began quietly gathering his resources. Jake wasn't just going to leave. He was going to make sure Samantha's betrayal cost her everything. The following days were a blur of secrecy. Jake hired a lawyer, began moving funds from their joint accounts, and sold investments Samantha didn't even know existed. Every transaction was calculated, precise, and designed to leave her without a safety net. Samantha, oblivious to Jake's knowledge, continued her charade. She smiled over breakfast, kissed him goodbye at the door, and sent flirtatious texts to Eric while Jake stood just feet away. Each moment only solidified Jake's resolve. Samantha's betrayal had revealed a side of her he never imagined existed. Cold, calculating, and selfish. He was no longer the same man who had walked into his home that evening. Jake was transforming, his heartbreak fueling a quiet strength and determination. Samantha's carefully constructed world was about to crumble, and Jake intended to be the one to pull the rug out from under her. Jake's transformation was swift and meticulous. Over the following days, he operated like a man on a mission, channeling his heartbreak into something productive. Every move he made was deliberate, designed to ensure that Samantha would feel the weight of her betrayal when the time came. The first step was gathering evidence. Jake knew that confronting Samantha without proof would be futile. She'd deny everything, twist the narrative, or manipulate the situation to her advantage. Late at night, when Samantha was asleep, he accessed her phone again. This time, he transferred screenshots of her messages with Eric to her laptop. The first step was gathering evidence, labeling dates and times to establish a pattern. Every incriminating word, every damning photo was stored in a folder titled Truth. It wasn't just text messages, though. Jake began to notice other clues: hotel receipts, a pair of earrings he'd never seen her wear before, and frequent charges at restaurants he'd never visited. These details had once seemed insignificant, but now they were pieces of a larger puzzle. Each revelation stung like a fresh wound, but Jake pushed through, determined to create an airtight case. The second step was financial. Jake had been the primary breadwinner in their marriage, managing their finances with care. Samantha rarely showed interest in the details, trusting him to handle it. That trust became his leverage. Over the course of a week, Jake moved funds from their joint accounts into separate ones she couldn't access. He liquidated stocks he'd purchased before they were married, ensuring they wouldn't fall under the pool of marital assets during a divorce. He consulted his lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Clara, who specialized in handling high-conflict separations. Clara listened carefully as Jake explained the situation, her pen moving briskly across a notepad. "You're doing the right thing by staying calm," she said. "We'll make sure she can't manipulate this in court." Clara outlined the legal process, advising Jake on what to document and how to protect his interests. It was a relief to have someone on his side who could guide him through the murky waters of divorce. Meanwhile, Jake maintained the facade of normalcy at home. He continued to kiss Samantha goodbye in the mornings, join her for dinner, and discuss mundane topics as though nothing had changed. The effort was exhausting, but it was necessary. Samantha's confidence in her deception was key to his plan. Unbeknownst to her, Jake was also preparing their home for a swift exit. He packed away his personal belongings, photographs, important documents, and sentimental items, and stored them in a secure storage unit. Bit by bit, he removed traces of himself from the house, ensuring that when the moment came, he could leave without hesitation. One evening, while Samantha was out, under the guise of meeting a friend, Jake walked through the empty rooms of their home. It struck him how hollow it all felt now, a facade of happiness that had masked her betrayal. He paused in the living room, where their wedding photo still hung on the wall. With a heavy heart, he took it down and placed it face down on the coffee table. By the end of the week, Jake had completed the final step of his plan. He'd secured a new apartment across town, paid for in advance, and furnished with the basics. It wasn't much, but it represented freedom. A fresh start, untainted by Samantha's lies. The morning before the confrontation, Jake stood at the bathroom mirror, staring at his reflection. The man looking back at him was changed. There was a hardness in his eyes, a determination that hadn't been there before. Samantha thought she held all the cards, but She was wrong. When she returned that evening, her demeanor was as cheerful as ever. Jake watched her with a quiet detachment, noting how easily she wore her mask. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "How was your day?" she asked casually. "Busy," Jake replied, his voice even. He didn't elaborate, and Samantha didn't press. It was a moment that epitomized their marriage in its final days. Her oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface, and him silently preparing to change their lives forever. Tomorrow, everything would unravel. Samantha didn't know it yet, but her carefully constructed world was about to collapse, and Jake would be the one to light the match. The day had finally arrived. Jake had spent weeks laying the groundwork for his exit, and now it was time to execute his plan. His emotions were a storm of anticipation, anger, and grief, but he forced himself to stay calm. Every detail had been carefully calculated to ensure Samantha would face the full consequences of her actions. Samantha had no idea what was coming. She breathed through the morning with her usual air of contentment, humming as she prepared breakfast. Jake watched her from across the kitchen, marveling at her audacity. How could she act so carefree when she had been living a double life? "Any plans for today?" she asked, her voice light as she buttered a piece of toast. "Just some errands," Jake replied, keeping his tone neutral. He sipped his coffee, masking the fire that burned inside him. As Samantha left for the day, Jake set his plan into motion. First, he called Clara to confirm that everything was in place. The divorce papers had been filed and served to Samantha's lawyer that morning, along with an attached list of documented evidence, screenshots of her messages, financial discrepancies, and even hotel receipts. Clara assured him that the legal groundwork was airtight. Next, Jake made a trip to their shared bank. The final transfers from their joint accounts had been made earlier in the week, leaving just enough to avoid suspicion, but not enough to give Samantha a financial cushion. He closed the account with a sense of finality, feeling the first flicker of freedom. Back at home, Jake packed the last of his belongings into his truck. The house, which had once been a symbol of their love and shared dreams, now felt like a hollow shell. He paused in the living room, taking one last look at the space where they had spent so many happy moments. Despite everything, a pang of sadness hit him. But this wasn't just about leaving, it was about reclaiming his life. He placed the divorce papers neatly on the kitchen counter, alongside a letter he'd written to Samantha. It wasn't an angry diatribe or a plea for explanation. It was simple and direct, outlining what he had discovered and why he was leaving. By the time Samantha returned that evening, Jake was already gone. Samantha stepped into the house, her heels clicking against the tile floor. She called out for Jake, but the silence that greeted her felt unnatural. The absence of his usual presence, his coat by the door, his keys on the counter. Breathlessly, she guarded the door. Something felt different in the air. "Jake?" she called again, her voice faltering. As she walked into the kitchen, her eyes fell on the stack of papers on the counter. The sight of the envelope with her name scrawled on the front stopped her cold. Slowly, she opened it and began to read. Each word hit her like a physical blow. The evidence Jake had gathered was irrefutable. She couldn't deny the texts, the hotel receipts, or the financial inconsistencies he had uncovered. He knew everything. Her heart raced as she flipped through the divorce papers. The terms were devastating. Jake had secured almost everything, leaving her with little to fight for. Samantha's carefully constructed world was crumbling before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. In desperation, she grabbed her phone and called Eric. The line rang endlessly before going to voicemail. Panic set in as she realized she couldn't rely on him to save her. Samantha paced the living room, her mind racing. How could this have happened? She thought she had been so careful, so clever. Jake had always been predictable, the steady and trusting husband she could manipulate without consequence. She had underestimated him. By the time night fell, Samantha was left alone in the house, grappling with the full weight of her choices. The home that had once been filled with warmth and laughter now felt cold and empty. Meanwhile, Jake sat in his new apartment, staring out at the city's skyline. The enormity of what he had done was beginning to sink in, but instead of regret, he felt relief. For the first time in years, he felt free. His phone buzzed with a message from Clara. "Everything is proceeding as planned. Let me know if she contacts you." Jake placed the phone down and exhaled deeply. He thought about Samantha, wondering how she was reacting. He imagined her shock, her anger, and perhaps even her guilt. But he didn't care anymore. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. The next morning, Jake began the first day of his new life. He walked into a cafe near his apartment, ordered a coffee, and sat by the window. The world outside buzzed with life, and for the first time in weeks, Jake felt like he was part of it again. He pulled out a notebook and began jotting down plans for the future. Places he wanted to visit, hobbies he wanted to pick up, and goals he had once shelved for the sake of his marriage. As he wrote, a sense of peace settled over him. Samantha's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also given him clarity. He had been living in a shadow of who he was, trying to be the perfect husband for someone who didn't deserve it. Now, he could focus on himself. Jake's journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was his to walk, free from lies and deceit. The morning after Jake's departure, Samantha woke to the disquieting stillness of an empty house. She had spent the night tossing and turning, unable to come to terms with the reality Jake had left her. Her mind raced, alternating between anger, disbelief, and a desperate need to fix what had unraveled so quickly. The first call she made was to Eric. The line rang only once before going to voicemail. Samantha left a shaky message. "Eric, call me back. I need to talk to you. This is serious." Hours passed without a response. The silence was deafening, and it only fueled her growing sense of panic. She scrolled through her contacts, unsure who else to reach out to. Her closest friends? No. They would have questions she couldn't answer without admitting the full extent of her betrayal. By mid-afternoon, she tried Eric again, this time from a different number. When he finally answered, his tone was clipped, impatient. "Samantha, I can't talk right now." "Eric, you don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "Jake knows everything. He left me. He's gone. I have nothing." Eric sighed audibly, the sound sharp and unkind. "Look, I told you from the beginning. This wasn't about making things serious. I never asked you to leave him. Are you serious right now? She snapped. I thought we were in this together. Eric's response was cold. Samantha, I'm sorry, but this is your mess. I can't get involved. Well, the line went dead, and for the first time, Samantha felt utterly abandoned. She sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the divorce papers Jake had left. In black and white legal text, they outlined how her betrayal had cost her not only her marriage, but nearly all of their shared assets. Jake had always been kind, even-tempered, and forgiving. Samantha had counted on those qualities to keep him in her orbit, no matter what she did. Now, she realized she had crossed a line she could never undo. Across town, Jake was navigating his new reality with a quiet determination. Sitting at his modest kitchen table, he reviewed the emails Clara had sent, outlining the next steps in the divorce proceedings. He wanted to be thorough, to ensure there were no gaps Samantha could exploit. Still, his thoughts occasionally wandered back to her. He wondered how she was handling the news, whether she'd realized just how much she had underestimated him. But those moments were fleeting, replaced by his growing focus on building a life of his own. Later that day, Jake decided to go for a walk through the neighborhood near his new apartment. The fresh air helped clear his mind, and as he strolled past the small shops and cafes, he felt a surprising sense of peace. For the first time in years, he wasn't weighed down by the constant anxiety of trying to please someone who had already checked out of their marriage. He stopped at a bookstore and browsed the shelves, eventually picking out a novel he'd been meaning to read for years. It was a small indulgence, but it symbolized something larger. A step toward rediscovering who he was outside of his role as Samantha's husband. Back at the house, Samantha's panic had morphed into anger. She wasn't used to being outmaneuvered, especially by Jake, whom she had always considered predictable. She decided to call a lawyer, hoping to salvage what she could from the divorce. When she arrived at the attorney's office, she was met with an unsettling dose of reality. The lawyer, a polished woman with an air of professionalism that bordered on icy, skimmed through the papers Jake had filed. Your husband's case is solid, the lawyer said bluntly. He's documented everything, the infidelity, the financial discrepancies. Unless there's a glaring issue, the court will likely side with him. Samantha's stomach churned. But I've been his wife for over a decade. I deserve something. The lawyer adjusted her glasses, her expression impassive. Marriage entitles you to certain things, but infidelity shifts the court's perspective. In this case, your actions give him leverage. Samantha left the office feeling more defeated than ever. As she drove home, she replayed Jake's calm demeanor over the past few weeks in her mind. How long had he known? How long had he been planning this? The realization that she had been outsmarted gnawed at her pride. In the days that followed, Samantha began to experience the full weight of her choices. Word of the separation spread quickly among their social circle, and while Jake's quiet dignity earned him support, Samantha found herself increasingly isolated. Mutual friends stopped responding to her calls, and invitations to events dried up. Even Samantha's parents, who had always doted on her, expressed their disappointment when they learned the truth. "Jake was the best thing that ever happened to you," her mother said during a strained phone call. "How could you throw it all away?" For the first time in years, Samantha felt genuine regret, not just for being caught, but for the choices that had led her to this point. Jake had been a good man, and she had taken him for granted. Now, she was left with the wreckage of her decisions, and there was no one left to blame but herself. Meanwhile, Jake's new life was slowly taking shape. He joined a local gym, reconnected with old friends, and even began volunteering at a community center. Each step forward was a reminder that he had not only survived Samantha's betrayal, but had emerged stronger because of it. One evening, as he sat on his balcony watching the sunset, he felt a deep sense of closure. Samantha's choices had set him free, and for that, he was unexpectedly grateful. Weeks turned into months, and the dust of the fallout began to settle. For Jake, each day brought small but significant victories as he rebuilt his life. The pain of betrayal no longer felt like a sharp wound, but rather a dull scar, a reminder of what he had endured and overcome. His new apartment had transformed into a space that felt distinctly his own. Gone were the muted colors and overly ornate furnishings Samantha had insisted on. Instead, Jake surrounded himself with vibrant artwork, plants that thrived under his care, and bookshelves filled with novels and travel guides. His living space reflected his newfound independence and the freedom to embrace his tastes. One of Jake's biggest steps forward came when he joined a local hiking club. He had always loved nature, but Samantha had found outdoor activities dull and inconvenient. The club gave him not only the opportunity to reconnect with his passion, but also a new circle of friends who shared his interest. On one such hike, Jake met Melanie, a soft-spoken teacher with an easy smile. They bonded over their shared love of the outdoors and began meeting for coffee after their hikes. Melanie's genuine curiosity about Jake's life and her warmth reminded him that connection was still possible, even after heartbreak. For Samantha, life had taken a much different trajectory. The divorce had left her financially unstable, forcing her to downsize from their spacious home to a small apartment. Her social circle continued to shrink as friends distanced themselves from the scandal surrounding her infidelity. Eric, the man for whom she had risked everything, had disappeared entirely from her life. He ignored her calls, blocked her on social media, and made it clear he wanted nothing to do with the fallout. Samantha found herself alone in a way she had never anticipated, grappling with the consequences of her actions. Her once unshakable confidence was replaced by regret and self-doubt. She often replayed the choices she had made, wondering how she had allowed herself to destroy the life she had built with Jake. There were moments when she thought about reaching out to him, but she knew it was too late for apologies. Jake had moved on, and Samantha was left with the echoes of her mistakes. Jake's career also took a turn for the better. With his newfound focus and energy, he excelled at work, earning recognition for his dedication and innovative ideas. His boss, impressed by his performance, offered him a promotion that came with a significant raise. For Jake, this wasn't just a professional win, it was proof that his life was on an upward trajectory. One evening, while organizing a box of old photos, Jake came across a picture of him and Samantha from their honeymoon. They were standing on a beach, arms wrapped around each other, smiling brightly. He stared at the photo for a long moment, trying to reconcile the happy couple in the image with the people they had become. Finally, Jake placed the photo back in the box and closed it. That chapter of his life was over, and he no longer felt the need to dwell on what might have been. His focus was on the present and the future, where new possibilities awaited. Months later, Jake found himself standing on a cliff, overlooking a breathtaking valley during a weekend hiking trip. Melanie stood beside him, the wind tousling her hair, as they admired the view. "This is incredible," she said, turning to him with a smile. "It really is," Jake replied, his gaze lingering on the horizon. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt a deep sense of contentment. Life had thrown him a curveball, but he had caught it, adapted, and emerged stronger. The pain of Samantha's betrayal had taught him resilience, and in the process, he had rediscovered himself. As they began the hike back down, Jake realized he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. The life he was building now was authentic, filled with experiences and people who truly valued him. His past with Samantha was a chapter he would never forget, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it had become a stepping stone to a better, brighter future.